And welcome to our Finger Lakes 2012 Vintage Riesling launch. Tonight we're going to have a virtual tasting of some delicious 2012 Finger Lakes Rieslings. My name's Jeff Hauk. I'm going to be our moderator this evening. We have some excellent wines broken into two flights. We have 5 wines that have been flighted by the residual sugar. And we are going to taste the first 3 wines and talk with the winemakers, break them down a little bit, hopefully get some questions from some of you media. And then we'll take a small break when we finish up and we'll go through the second flight. This evening, in our first flight, you have wines from Three Brothers Wineries, Dr. Konstantin Frank, and Thirsty Owl Wine Company. We have with us from Three Brothers this evening, Justin Policelli. Justin is the winemaker for Three Brothers. They make some excellent wines. They really an up-and-comer in the Finger Lakes. And he has you trying this evening Stoney Lonesome 0 Degree Riesling. And that's a dry Riesling from 2012. Also a double gold medal winner at the just recently finished Wine and Food Classic. Justin, you want to tell us a little bit about how you made that wine, talk a little bit about that 2012 growing season, and we'll see if we get some other questions about the wine as we go along.
Sure. First, I'd like to say thanks to everybody for letting us display our wines for you and giving us feedback on them. I have the 0 Degree of Riesling for you. It's part of a Riesling program that we have that features 0 degree, 1st degree, 2nd degree, and 3rd degree. They all correspond with the IRF scale in terms of sweetness. The suggested retail value on the 0 Degree of Riesling is $16, and you can get it at the winery as well as several liquor stores throughout New York State.
You also, Justin, can that wine be shipped to other states?
It can. It can be shipped to multiple other states. I don't know all of them
Okay.
off the top of my head, but yeah. So it was a fairly straightforward wine in terms of production. I forget the harvest numbers exactly, but I do remember that particular vintage, the acids dropping off fairly quickly at harvest time, forcing us to probably pick a little sooner than we wanted that year. It would have been pressed off. We use press fractioning, and probably the 0 Degree is 90% free run, most likely in the final blend, followed by some cold settling and then very long, slow, cool fermentation. The resulting wine is very dry. I think it finishes out at about 1.5 grams per liter, balanced with like 6.5 grams of acid, I think.
We had a question specifically for you, Justin, with that IRF scale. Do you think that it's helped consumers, and do you guys have any evidence of, since you went with the degrees, to follow along with the IRF scale and increasing your sales of Riesling?
Yeah, you know, we thought it was fairly helpful to consumers. We thought it was a good idea. It does involve a little, some more technicalities in the wine cellar and winemaking, trying to stick to the numbers to make wines that fit into the scale, but from a consumer standpoint, you know, we took it a little farther and catered the 0 Degree, 1st degree, and 2nd, 3rd degree to the IRF scale to make it a little bit easier for consumers to pick the Riesling that they liked. And it was geared to help display the versatility of the Riesling grape.
One of our media representatives, Frank Morgan, had asked a question about you guys using rootstock 3309 in your Riesling vineyard, and he wasn't familiar with it and just wondered if it was common in the Finger Lakes. He's from Virginia.
Sure. Yeah, I would say a 3309 is very, very common in the Finger Lakes.
Probably one of the most common ones, I would say.
Yeah.
Comparing this vintage for you, Justin, to the previous couple of vintages, just from a winemaking standpoint, a few people had asked that question.
This vintage was a little more tricky for myself, just because I don't have, I only have about 8 or 9 years of wine making and vineyard experience in the Finger Lakes. So I couldn't really base it on any other years. I knew we had to pick because the acids were starting to drop out fairly quickly, and we wanted to preserve those. Versus a vintage like 2010 that could have been touted as, one of the best growing years in the last 40 years. Finger Lakes grape growing.
Very good. Well, Justin, I think for this evening, we may come back to you with another question.
Sure.
But we're going to go ahead and move on to our second wine of the evening. From Dr. Konstantin Frank Wine Cellars this evening, we have Fred Frank, owner, and Fred, would your title be general manager also there?
Yes.
Of Dr. Konstantin Frank. Fred brought with him Dr. Frank 2012 Dry Riesling. And not only is it 2012, but that wine, Fred told me a few moments ago, is a 12-time gold medal winner. And not that that's unusual. Dr. Frank racks up hundreds of gold medals throughout the year, but that seems like it's a particularly hot wine for them at the wine competitions right now. And Dr. Frank's reputation speaks for itself. Fred will talk a little bit about how that wine was made, that growing season, and then we'll throw out a few other questions as you people ask for them. Welcome tonight, Fred.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you all for joining us. I wanted to give you a little history about our winery and our founder, Dr. Konstantin Frank. He was a PhD in viticulture, and his thesis was techniques for growing vinifera in a cold climate. So when he emigrated to New York in 1951 from Europe and was told by industry experts you couldn't grow vinifera in New York, he took that as a challenge and set out to prove the experts wrong. So one of the challenges was phylloxera. New York State is probably the epicenter of phylloxera population worldwide. So he was able to tackle that problem by grafting onto resistant rootstock, resistant to phylloxera. So that was one of the challenges. And the other challenge, the cold winters, he was able to minimize that by selecting very good vineyard sites on steep slopes, well-drained soils close to the deep lakes, the Finger Lakes, and they moderate the winter temperatures and also extend the growing season. So those were really the two main obstacles which prevented vinifera from growing in the past, and he was successful, and that really sparked a quality renaissance in New York wines. Back in '62, when he started the winery, there were 12 wineries in New York, and today there are over 330 wineries. So it really has been a tremendous renaissance. And what we're finding is that our cool climate in the Finger Lakes is ideal for the Northern European wine grapes. Riesling, of course, is the one I think that's getting the most fame and notoriety. It's our #1 variety, and we make many different styles of Riesling. I think another great thing about the variety, besides being consistent quality for us year in, year out in the Finger Lakes, is also the variety of styles. We make everything from a sparkling Riesling called Celebra to our dry Riesling, a semi-dry Riesling, a sweet Riesling, a reserve Riesling, a late harvest dessert style Riesling. So you can see really is tremendously diverse. Now this wine, the dry Riesling, is one of my favorites. We source this primarily from our Keuka Lake vineyards where we have very rocky soils. We have a lot of shale in the soil. They're also quite acidic, and they're steep slopes, very well draining, poor soils, and we have very old vines. So because Dr. Frank planted these vineyards back in the late 50s, early 60s, and they were on the resistant rootstock, they didn't need to be replanted the way many vines are now being replanted in California. And as a result of this, they're now some of the oldest vines in America. And many European winemakers who have experience with old vine vineyards feel that they make some of their best quality wine. So the old vineyards that we have really are the backbone, I think, of the quality of our wines. And the reason experts think old vine vineyards contribute to the quality is several-fold. Firstly, the roots go much deeper than a young vine, so they get into the subsoil layers that a shallow-rooted young vine couldn't approach. And second of all, the yields are smaller by naturally smaller yields, so you have more concentration in the fruit, more extract in the fruit. And finally, the old vines have a very thick trunk, which helps to aid carbohydrate storage for the vine. So for these reasons, many wine experts believe old vine vineyards can make some of the highest quality wines, and we're blessed to have those that Konstantin planted many years ago. The current lineup of wines at our winery is the most awarded that we've ever produced in 51 years. So we're up to 89 gold medals this year. We're hoping to break 100, knock on wood. We still have a couple months left in the year. And this particular wine, the dry Riesling, has really done phenomenally well for us in wine competitions where the judges are tasting the wines blind, and they don't know the results till the end of the competition. It's even taken some sweepstakes awards where it was picked not only as a gold medal winner, but the top wine of the entire competition, with thousands of wines entered from all over the country. And I think it shows the potential that we have in the Finger Lakes for quality Riesling.
What was the suggested retail price on that, Fred?
Thank you for asking. It's $14.99, and it's available throughout New York State and quite a few surrounding states. We're distributed in about 35 states across the country. If you go to our website, drfrankwines.com, you can click on distributors, and it will show which states we have distribution.
I got to get to a couple of quick questions before we move on. One of our media people had asked whether it was 100% Riesling or any blend of other grapes.
Yes, it is 100% Riesling.
And quickly, Justin, was yours 100% Riesling?
Yes, it was.
Okay. And Len Thompson, a good supporter of New York wines, the New York Cork Report, had asked if there was any botrytis in the grapes from that wine.
We try to limit the botrytis in the dry Riesling, so there may be a small amount, but we try to limit it.
Very good. And then just this question, Fred, you could probably answer. I think Renee Keel asked it. It may have been geared towards you, Justin. They asked what would cause acid to drop and cause you to pick grapes earlier. And I'll kind of let anybody. Fred, do you want to take it?
Sure. Well, last year, 2012, was an unusual year in the Finger Lakes. It was one of the earliest harvest dates that we've ever experienced. And because of that, it caught some of the winemakers off guard because they're used to, picking based on past history. Certain grapes are ripen around, a certain period, but I think the unusually warm weather in 2012 resulted in some grapes being picked perhaps a little later than the winemakers would like. And as a result, the acidity dropped off somewhat. So depending on the vineyards and the winery and the location, in our case, we have some of the higher elevation vineyards in the Finger Lakes, and Keuka Lake tends to be a little bit cooler, ripens a little bit behind some of the other larger lakes. So, in our case, the acidity was still quite good, and I think the wine had good balance.
Okay. And then I had one last question, and then I got to move on to our next panelist. Could you just quickly, Fred, discuss if you've seen any trends with Riesling with dry versus sweet from a sales standpoint, both at the winery and out in the market? Yes,
we've seen an increased interest in dry Riesling, and I think this is a style that really works well in the Finger Lakes. It's helping to develop more Riesling being added to fine wine lists in New York State and surrounding states. More sommeliers and more consumers are discovering the joys of dry Riesling and the affinity with fine dining. These dry Rieslings, they have moderate alcohol, they have a nice crisp acidity, and they really pair very well with a number of light dishes, whether it be a chicken dish or fish dish. And so I think dry Riesling is a category that's certainly growing for us in the Finger Lakes.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Fred. Lots of good information there. Appreciate it. Congratulations on all the gold medals. Keep them rolling.
Thank you.
Next up tonight, we have with us, I'd have to say, another one of the harder working people I know in the Finger Lakes wine industry. We have Sean Keim from Thirsty Owl Wine Company. Sean not only does the winemaking, but is very involved hands-on in the vineyard. So you could easily stop by, see him out on a tractor, or see him in the winery. Just depends on the day. And Sean has done a great job at Thirsty Owl. They've in a relatively short existence compared with Fred. They've won a Governor's Cup there at Thirsty Owl, and Sean has with him tonight 2012 Thirsty Owl Riesling. And this one has also won a number of gold medals. And I tried all three of these wines before I came in, and I liked all three of them. And this wine was very nice. And Sean, you like to take us through, tell us a little bit about that wine, and quickly I'll have you shoot out your suggested retail price for me.
Okay, I'll start with that. It's $14.95 is just retail price. It's available at the tasting room and all across New York State, including New York City, and of course, always from the website. It can be ordered and shipped to most states. As far as the winemaking, it comes from a mixture of our 30-year-old vines and newer vineyard, which has two different clones in it. And I like mixing up the two different blocks. You get different characteristics between the two, and I like doing that. It brings out the best characteristics in both of them, I believe. We ferment it slowly and cool, use two different yeasts in separate tanks and combine them later on to further get bring out more characteristics, hopefully.
And we also had another one, Sean, that if you could tell us how climate change has affected Thirsty Owl's production, whether or not you guys have seen things that you've had to respond to.
One of the biggest things we've seen is warming up earlier in the springtime, so we're getting earlier bud break and having danger with spring frost. That's not really a winemaking issue, but it is something that we have to worry about every year. Sunburn on the grapes is another issue. We have to kind of take into account what the year's like, and when we do our leaf pulling, how much we pull, if we want to make a second pass on pulling leaves. And then like last year, 2012 was a hot year, so like they said, we harvested a lot earlier. That being said, we're in a very much different year now. This is more like kind of like an average type of year, and we're back to normal. So one of the biggest things that we deal with is variability in climate from year to year. And I have to say that in the time that I've been involved in this business, winemakers as a whole across the region have gotten very good at adapting their techniques and the way they handle the grapes in the vineyard and in the winery to adapting to any type of year that is thrown at us. And Riesling is one of those grapes that really can make good wine in just about any year with it.
And to that comment, I think we probably couldn't have much different years than 2011 and 2012 back to back. Very different. But yet you taste great wines really solidly from most producers. from both those vintages, and they were drastically different.
Yeah, and you go back to 2009, and that's, you know, compare 2009 to 2010, those were massively different years. And yeah, I think in the past 4 years we've had the whole spectrum of what you can see in the Finger Lakes. Or 5 years if you include this, but yeah, the result is the same. Good Rieslings from everybody across the Finger Lakes.
This is a media question, and I'll have Sean answer, and then kind of go to you other guys. Does anybody have like a favorite wine and food pairing with Riesling? This one, I'm sorry, I had to just throw it on you guys. There's no preparation involved there. We'll just, if you can think of something you might enjoy yourself at home.
I actually had this particular Riesling last night with barbecue chicken.
It was
You
nice.
know, Riesling, of course, fish is always great with Riesling, but you know, any chicken, pork, fish, I don't think you can go wrong with Riesling or on its own.
Anything you enjoy, Fred, is kind of like a classic combo for you?
Yes, I had it recently with barbecued pork tenderloin. It was just fabulous. So I just think dry Riesling, pork tenderloin is a great combination.
How about you, Justin?
It's funny, but lately I've really enjoyed it with Chinese food. And I'm not sure if it's the saltiness in the Chinese food, but it's paired real well lately this summer.
Very good. All right, Sean, anything else you'd like to add about the making of your Riesling for this evening?
Just, you know, like I said, we try to mix up where the grapes come from within our vineyard, take into account variability in clones. Some of our clones are unknown. Variability using soils, and try to get the best character, the best of each possible combination to come out in the final product. And to that effect, we try to make a wine that, this one in particular is 16 grams per liter of sugar, 9.4 grams per liter of acid. So we get something that has a little bit more residual sugar, but is still balanced out by the acid. So it's something that dry wine drinkers can appreciate, something that sweeter wine drinkers can appreciate. It's kind of like the melting pot wine that hopefully appeals to anybody. And of course, we do make our drier style Riesling too, which is about 0.5% residual sugar.
Sean's winery that he works for, Thirsty Owl, those of you who aren't as familiar, it's on Cayuga Lake, and I feel it has one of the most beautiful views in the Finger Lakes. When he's at work, he probably keeps his head down, but
You don't notice
when
it
you look
you're-
up, he's got one of the most gorgeous views in the Finger Lakes.
You don't notice it until you come there after work.
So if you come to the region, make sure you check it out. The other question before we let you guys go, there was a question from one of our media members about how you guys are dealing with, and if you're finding less resistance with New York State restaurants with regards to placing your Rieslings on their wine lists. And you guys can all touch on it just briefly, and then we'll release you guys and move on here. How about for you guys, Sean?
Yeah, we've been getting into more and more restaurants lately, especially in New York City. We're offering wine, dry Riesling. We don't have this one in kegs, but we do have a dry Riesling in kegs. It's been very popular down in the city. And yeah, it's been well received, and sales are picking up. So I think it's definitely moving forward.
Great. How about you guys, Fred?
Yes, we've seen increased interest in Finger Lakes wines at fine restaurants, and I'll give a shout out to Michael Warren Thomas for his Mission Finger Lakes. He's trying to spur his friendly Rochester area restaurants to carry more Finger Lakes wine. So we really appreciate his efforts to try to increase Finger Lakes wines in the Rochester area.
And how about for you guys, Justin?
Sure, we're not as represented as either of these guys in New York City because we're a fairly new winery. We did open in 2006. But it seems like the cooperation is there and is increasing between restaurant owners, and we do have a lot of good spokespeople for the wineries, and I'll probably butcher his name, but Thomas Struzik seems to be doing a lot for the Finger Lakes, promoting us. He visits often.
Very good. Well, you guys have done a great job. Thank you very much. And we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with our second group of winemakers. And thanks again, guys.
Cheers.
All right, folks, welcome back. Our second flight tonight. We've got two fine gentlemen up here for you. We have Aaron Riesling from Hosmer Winery and John McGregor from McGregor Vineyards. And they've got two 2012 wines. The first one's going to be a dry Riesling, and the second one a semi-dry. We're going to talk a little bit to both of them, and hopefully we can get some questions for these guys. They've got a little extra time, so I know some of you out there, come on, tweet us some questions so we can get these guys, keep them interacted here. Our first wine tonight is Hosmer's 2012 Dry Riesling. Really nice wine. I just stepped out for a second in between flights and tried it myself. We have Aaron Riesling here tonight. Aaron's been with Hosmer for a long time. Does a great job. Makes consistently great Rieslings along with a number of other excellent wines at Hosmer's. And Aaron's going to tell us a little bit about 2012, how he made this wine, and what he thinks about it right now.
Well, the 2012 Dry Riesling, it retails for $15. It's about 0.5% residual sugar. pH is just under 3. I think it's 2.9. Acids around 7.5 grams. Well, we picked it a lot earlier. It was picked actually in September. It was that ripe of a year. It came in at 21 bricks. I kept the alcohol around, I think it's around 11.5, might be closer to 12. Yeah, it's nice. I mean, it was picked in actually in September. It was that ripe of a year. It came in at 21 bricks. I kept the alcohol around, I think it's around 11.5, might be closer to 12. Yeah, it's nice. I mean, let's see what else to say about it. It's clone 239. It's all from a block of grapes that's about 10 years old or so. What else? I guess that pretty much sums up. It's pretty straightforward.
Do you find, like Aaron, with the kind of looking at, you've been there for a while, like if you look at like 10, 11, 12 vintages, going through and tasting them, how do you feel about comparing those years with this one? And do you prefer like a hotter year or a year that's a little cooler, such as the one we've got going on?
Well, I think that with a warmer year, it gives you a little bit more flexibility because then you can pick the grapes a little sooner than you would need to. Like in 2012, we sort of basically cherry picked when they could come in. 2011, they weren't quite there on what would you consider optimal, but we picked them when we did because within a few hours after the last grape was picked, it rained like 3 inches. So. But the wine still turned out. I mean, it's just we augmented our approach and decided to change styles. And I think it's good not to believe in like ideal situations and more so just being able to adapt with what the weather is doing. And Finger Lakes Riesling are very capable of many different styles. So in 2011 being a cooler year, we had a little more residual sugar in the dry. In 2012, a little less. In 2010, it was a wicked hot year, and the wine reflected of that. It's a little bit softer in style. And 2009 was another wet, cold year until we had September, and that's what made the year. And that dry Riesling had a considerable amount of residual sugar and still finished quite dry because the acid was much higher than what would be ideal. Around like 12 grams, I believe. So,
Aaron, someone had asked about Clone 239, how prevalent it is in the Finger Lakes.
It's probably it has a good presence. It's
One of the probably top two, right?
yeah. I mean, the majority of our farm is that and Clone 90.
Yep, those are probably the two most widely.
And very consistent. We have a nice fruit set, small clusters. It seems to do pretty well with any disease pressure. Yeah.
Also, before we started our tasting, Aaron, we had a little spirited conversation about Finger Lakes Riesling's acidity and minerality and whether the soil affects that or whether it's that simple. You want to just address that question?
Yeah. I don't think that there's one specific thing that makes up Finger Lakes Riesling. I think, there's soil type, but there's also the weather and there's the little microclimates that are here and there. It's the length of the season. Cultural practices take a huge play into the quality that we're seeing. I mean, the grape growing that's being done now with the help of all the research that's been done and just more insight from outsiders coming in and sharing what they've learned and their experiences has helped a lot. So it's more of I think a collective of everything that is in the environment. But I mean, yeah, soil is a big part of it. But
Not the only answer.
it's not the only thing, which is fine.
Is that 100% Riesling?
It is.
We had a question about actually all the wines this evening, whether they were 100% Riesling. When was your 2012 bottle, Darren?
That was only bottled in, I think it was June. So it's really
Just
young.
like 2 months in the bottle.
Yeah. The sulfur's a little jumpy on it right now on the nose, but it'll calm down a bit.
And for a lot of folks, even though we're going through the Riesling launch, I'm sure some of the media members know this, the wineries are all selling out and switching over at different times, and what's currently in the market, there may be 2011 still in the market for Hosmer's.
Yeah. We haven't shipped any of our 2012 out yet. We just shifted it out in the on our retail side, but down the wholesale market, it's still 2011. So
I had a question from Renee Keel, but we may need a little clarification from her. She wanted to know what our biggest issue was with Riesling, and
like a growing issue or winemaking issue?
I can't give you any more specifics.
Oh, I think the biggest winemaking issue is that it doesn't really have one other than the demand is rising, so that probably directly correlate with the growing issue, and we need to plant more Riesling. I mean, I've been saying that we could plant 5 acres of Riesling every year for the next 3 years, and we might be able to address the demand that's going to be happening by the end of this decade.
That's what we're all hoping for, right?
I think so.
One more question, just a general question. Frank Morgan in Virginia is seeing a trend there toward alternate closures. We only had one screw cap this evening. Are you guys seeing any trend in the Finger Lakes?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, you're using natural corks, John. So,
Yep.
And we've used those as well. We got away from we were using synthetics, which was a terrible idea. And then we got into a alternative cork, but it's made from natural cork. It's an amalgamate, and I'm really happy with it. But yeah, alternative closures are good. It means that there's a provoked thought that is showing in the level of quality of the wines that are being produced, and people taking different approaches, but still utilizing natural corks is an important thing. So yeah, that's.
And Aaron, when I know you gave us your price. Did you talk at all about distribution for Hosmer's Dry Riesling?
Yeah, I mean, we're available down in the metro market. Our distributor is Southern Wine and Spirits. Yeah, but it's pretty well available through most East Coast states.
One thing we haven't talked about, which is kind of interesting because I think we all know the answer to it, and I just got a question about the ageability of these wines.
Yeah, well, John and I were just talking about that. What did you say? You opened a 94?
Yep, last weekend.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and
It's a very similar year to these 12s. It was a really hot, luscious fruit Riesling year.
yeah, it's Finger Lakes Rieslings without a doubt, and the way that they change, it's kind of amazing. Like they turn into these wines that you wouldn't necessarily think that they were capable of, because we don't have for the most of us haven't, at least for me, I've been making wine in the Finger Lakes since '02, so I don't have a really deep scope of things. But even to taste something that's 10 years old is profound at times. So yeah, there's no problem with Riesling's aging, and for that matter, any of the Finger Lakes wines that are made well age just fine.
And that calls back to the closure conversation, which is
Yep.
what we were talking to out there, directly related to,
Definitely.
what's your approach with this wine? Is it something that you expect and encourage people to take from shelf to glass, or do you anticipate encouraging them to squirrel some of it away? And that's going to make a decision on what kind of closure you're going to do.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Aaron. We'll probably come back to you in a couple of minutes, but we're going to move on to our second panelist in this flight. We have John McGregor, owner of McGregor Vineyards, and John has been involved in this industry for a long time. He has with him his 2012 semi-dry Riesling, another real nice wine I had a chance to try just before I came in here. And John, you want to kind of take us through a little bit. Those of you, again, aren't familiar, McGregor is one of the families that's been in the wine business in the Finger Lakes. For what year did you start, John?
71.
71. So
Vinifera grape grower. So
crazy a long time.
that's it.
So he probably got to do some rock picking as a boy. And,
Still do.
So you want to tell us a little bit about 2012?
Sure. First, I should mention our vineyard's located on the east side of Keuka Lake. Very steep slopes, again, very depleted soils, a lot of slate and shale, a lot of clay. 2012, with everyone else, was just ideal in terms of for the grape grower getting to choose when to bring the fruit in. And we pick all of our grapes by hand, and we practice some cluster thinning with Riesling, but also tend to have yields at this point that are under, every year, under 3 ton per acre, sometimes under 2 ton per acre, regardless of what we're growing, and that's a function of vine age as well. These are now 30 to 40 years old, and this particular wine, when we have a year like we did climate-wise, is when my winemaker and I get very excited for this style of wine, having something where the orchard, peach, apricot, nectarine, your stone fruit characters really show up in the wine well, and I find that that the high acids that we get in the grapes really counterpoint nicely and can hold some extra residual sugar just to add a more luscious, full mouth feel to the wine. And I'm most happy with this kind of style. We did a dry style as well in 2012, but I think right now, as far as showing goes, that needs a little more time in the bottle. This seems a little more approachable, and that's why I chose this tonight.
And what's the price on that one, John?
$17.99. We do very little distribution, but I do have a statewide distributor, Opeachy, and then down in the metro area, Upstate Wine Company carries our wines. So it's definitely available for the New York City folks.
And yours was 100% Riesling
Yeah.
also, right?
Yep.
Another question, John, about soil. What is the best soil for growing Riesling?
Our vineyard soils.
That is the soil at the McGregor farm. I actually thought it was over on Cayuga Lake.
No, right. That's such a difficult question to answer, particularly in the Finger Lakes where these soils are glacial till. We were joking before this began that you walk down your row, you're going to walk over sometimes 4 or 5 different soil profiles.
So for people who don't know what you mean when you say glacial till, you want to just explain to them for a second, John, about how like the glaciers
Sure.
drag the
13,000+ years ago, this area was covered with about a mile and a half thick sheet of ice. And as it was retreating north and melting, it's not only the pressure of the ice scraping and pushing against the landscape and reforming it, but it's also leaving tillage from what it has picked up and carried with it as it's moved across the landscape. So what you're left with, in our case, were some wonderfully perfect lakes for growing these grapes around, and soils of a nature that were essentially removed and just left with rock debris. And the last 13,000 years, we've had a buildup of biomass, detritus, leaves, trees, decay, and that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about the soils here, on top of generally speaking, highly mineralized and acidic clays and rock base.
Great. Well, I think that'll help some people who aren't that familiar with the Finger Lakes.
And it works really well for these steely Rieslings, these really mineral-driven Rieslings. Grapes like depleted soils.
Someone had asked John about how you guys, and I think it's directed toward both of you guys, like where do we derive retail price from?
A number of sources. Demand, I'll speak for myself. Demand, tradition, looking at what the general marketplace is bearing. Less so for me because I'm more driven through selling direct to consumer at my winery. But I look at previous vintage and determine whether the current vintage is reflective of an average trend or is something that's just superior, excelsior from what's come before it. How much of it we were able to produce. That's some of what I personally look at.
Our philosophy is basically the same thing too. And Finger Lakes wines are, by and large, are incredibly affordable considering the quality of wine that we're producing. So along with that, and maybe I'm not the best spokesperson for it, but there's a lot of humility in the Finger Lakes, and I think that's a lot of it too. Just like honest to goodness people that are making these wines and want to share them. And there's definitely examples where there are Rieslings that are a lot more expensive than others, and they're well worth it. But yeah, most of them are just to share with the people.
And if you guys, either one of you wanted to share a different region that you enjoy Rieslings from, or do you only drink Finger Lakes Riesling?
Honestly, I would have to say 9 out of 10 Rieslings I drink are from right around here.
Yeah.
I think more in terms of what lake Riesling do I want to drink tonight rather than what region of Riesling am I going to drink from tonight.
Yeah.
I've got Finger Lakes blinders on when it comes to Riesling.
That's all right. We'll allow that. Can you guys give us a little hint into what you see looking in the crystal ball for 2013 with regards to Riesling?
It's going to be interesting. We just picked some grapes Thursday night. Yeah, today we picked some grapes, and it was Save All, and it's not sort of apples and orange. Well, variety. It's a little different, but within since Friday they dropped 5 grams of acid. So that's telling me that this year will be a year that it's probably not going to be as a pressure of rain and disease as much as the grapes are going to be ripening very rapidly. So that's a good thing. It's going to be a good year. We're going to have the ability to pick when we want to pick a little sooner, and numbers might be a little more skewed than typical. So probably going to get some really interesting Rieslings this year compared to other years. And you'd think there'd be at some point years are going to start repeating themselves somewhere down the line, but these last 5 years have been
all unique in the
all
range.
unique. There's
everywhere.
not one similarity that makes them identical. So this year will be good. It's always good. We're good at growing Riesling in the Finger Lakes. And
Even in a bad year, the Rieslings are going to be quite
To me,
nice.
that's a sign of a good varietal for us.
Yeah.
You get good wines across the board, and well, you guys have had some great information tonight, and I did want to take a minute and thank you guys, and also thank our many media members who joined us tonight, followed along, and gave us some great questions so we could have some nice interaction. And hopefully we'll all have you on for another virtual tasting in the future. And that's going to be it for tonight. Thank you guys all for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
very good.
Cheers.